Hello there and welcome. In the previous episode, we started working on the base building system. We created a few different scripts and I started to explain these scripts. So we're going to continue doing this in this episode. And in this episode, we're finally going to actually see our items being constructed in the scene because it's something that we did not see in the previous episode. We're going to start seeing this entire system taking form and not only the code itself. But as I told you, it's a very complex and long system, so there's a lot of coding involved. And then when we understand the code, we can start creating all the visual aspects. So let's go back into the construction manager. So inside the construction manager, we already talked about the different properties. We talked about the materials and the ghosts. So now we're going to understand all the different methods and we're going to build the system when we actually reach the different parts. So we have this activate construction placement. So as we saw before, when we right click on the item we want to construct, if it's a constructible item, then it's going to activate this method and it's going to receive a string with the name of the item that we want to construct. Because if we want to construct a wall, it will pass in a wall. If we want to construct a foundation, it will pass in a foundation. And then the first thing we're going to do is to instantiate the item that we want to construct, right? Because in the inventory, we're simply clicking on a UI. We click on an image of the item, but eventually we want to instantiate an actual 3D model of this item and place it inside our world. So we pass in the name of the item and then it will search for the same item inside the resources and it will instantiate it and it will keep a reference inside this item game object. Then we're going to replace the name of this item to be the name that was passed because it is possible that the name was something clone, right? Foundation clone, wall clone. So we want to make it foundation. We don't want this clone, so we want to make it clean. Then after we change the name, we also want to set the new transform of this item. So we want to set the new parent. And the parent will be this construction holding spot that we created in the previous episode. We simply want to set this item to be inside of this spot because this is the spot the player sees in front of him, and then we're going to be able to actually see the item and place it anywhere we want. Then we also have this item to be constructed and we simply set the item to become this item to be constructed, which is also a game object. We change the tag of this item to be active constructible. Okay, so we want to create this tag as well, although it's something that we're going to trigger only programmatically, only on constructibles that are active, but we still need to create this tag. So before we go to create this tag, we are going to continue with this method. So then we also set this item to actually make his collider to be disabled. We don't want it to move different objects in our scene. Right now, it's just an item that we want to place, so there is no need for it to actually have a collider and actually be solid. So we're simply going to set it to be false because we don't want it to be active for now. When we place the item eventually, then we're going to set it to true again because we obviously want items that were set to be collidable and then people, for example, walls, we don't want to be able to walk through walls, right? But for now, we want it to be false. And then we also activate the construction mode because we want to know that right now we are in construction mode. We need to select the spot to place the item. And eventually we're going to be able to check different things using this Boolean, right? So this is this method. And first of all, we need to create this active constructible tag, but we also want to actually create our first model, the model that we're going to instantiate. And the first one will be the foundation model, okay? Because all the things that we're going to be able to construct will be placed on top of this foundation model. And that's not something new. In many games, it works this way. The foundation is the first thing you build, and then you build on top of it. So let's first create this active constructible tag. Inside our game, we're simply going to go over here. And I already created this tag. All you need to do is simply add a new tag and give it this name. Okay, so just make sure that this name is exactly the name that you're going to have over here. Now we want to create the model itself. Okay, so inside our scene, we're going to create a new empty object and we're going to name it foundation model. Okay. And the reason we want to give it this model is because we want to separate between the actual foundation model that is going to be visible inside our scene and the foundation resource, the one that we click on inside the inventory. So if we go inside our resources, we already have this foundation and wall resources. And it's something that I did not show you because I told you that I already created these blueprints over here. So when I created these blueprints, I simply created the resources as well, but you already know how to do all of this. You simply duplicate one of these other resources and then you change the different informations. For the foundation, I simply duplicated one of these that we already had. I changed the name over here inside the inventory item script. I changed the description and I changed the functionality. I simply said right click to position the item. For the description, I said something like used as the base of a structure. Again, it's really up to you. I give it the name. And of course, I did not trigger anything over here because it's not an equipable and it's not a consumable. It is a trashable. And now after we created this is usable boolean, we also want to make it is usable, right? Because that's why we created this new boolean in the previous episode. This item is going to be a usable item. And of course, you also need to make sure that this drag and drop script is over here. So this is something that we create for each of these blueprints that are going to appear inside our inventory when we actually craft them, okay? So the wall, the same thing. I simply named it wall and it's going to be a trashable, it's going to be a usable, okay? So we have this foundation. And of course, also don't forget to give it an image. I gave it the same image as the one that is inside this blueprint, but you can give it another image. This image is the image that is going to appear inside the inventory. And we can actually test it out. I think, let's see, let's run the game. Hope nothing breaks. So we have this construction category and inside we have this foundation and this wall. So in order to create a foundation, we need 4 planks, okay? So let's get these 4 planks. As we know from the previous episodes, for planks, we need to have logs, right? And then we can process them into planks. So in order to get a log, we need to chop down a few trees or 1 tree. So we have this axe inside our inventory. Of course, in our game, we're not going to just have this axe. We're going to need to craft him as well. But to make things easier, we already have this axe over here. Let's equip it. And now let's take it out. Let's chop it down. I also added a few more sounds. This tree falling sound, right? So let's pick up these logs. And now we can see that we have both of these logs. So we can refine and create these planks. So we have 2 planks, but we need 4. So let's refine this other log. And now we can build this foundation. So if we craft then we see this foundation inside our inventory. And the idea is that we're going to right click on it and we're going to be able to walk around and just select a spot to construct it, right? So if it's going to hover and overlap these trees, it's going to be red because it's not a valid spot. And if it's in the air, it's not going to be valid. But if it's sitting on the ground, then it's going to be green. And then we're going to left click and it's going to be placed over here. If we right click, then it's simply going to cancel it, and then we can go back inside the inventory and it will still be here. So let's continue with building the actual foundation model. So we double click on this, and we actually don't want to make it an empty game object. Let's delete this. Let's create a 3D object, and it's going to be a cube. Okay, let's rename it to foundation model. And then we're going to double click on it. And we're going to give it a few sizes. Again, you can play with the sizes, with the positions. It's really about your game and the way it's going to look in your game. But for me, it's going to be something like (1.5, 11, -12). And the size will be 5.55. And it's important to give it a position because when you're going to make it into a prefab, you want it to spawn or get instantiated in this position. Although this position is going to be inside our player construction holder, right? Because we want it to be visible in front of us, so we need to set a specific position. Now, of course, you can also set the position programmatically when you actually instantiate it, but it's also possible to just set the position over here and then it's just going to remember it and we don't need to do it inside the code. So our foundation is going to be very simple, some kind of foundation-like shape. Okay, now over here we have one box collider, so we are going to add another box collider because usually we want to have one that is going to be triggered, that is going to detect different triggers with other items. So we're going to just make it trigger, and the other one is going to be our solid collider, right? The one that we're going to enable and disable. Because if we step on this foundation, we do want to walk on it, we don't want to fall down. That's why we need this solid collider. Another thing that we want is a rigid body. So rigid body, and we're going to disable this gravity, we're going to set it to kinematic, and we're going to freeze the rotation on all axes. The next thing we want to do is we want to add a material to this foundation, the default material. So if we go to our materials, we are going to use this foundation default material that we talked about in the previous episode. We're simply going to drag it on top of this, and you can see that it fits, and that's something that we're going to use in this series. For you, it can be something else, it can be something nicer, it can fit your own style. The next thing we need to do is to drag this constructible item script onto this model, because this is the script that is going to take care of the different events and the different functionality of this thing. So we're going to take this script and drag it on our model. Okay, so we can find it over here. There are a lot of things that we need to talk about with this script, but for now it will do. Now, as we said, we need to drag this solid collider onto this solid collider reference. Okay, so we simply go over here, we find the solid collider, so it's the collider without the trigger, and we're simply going to place it over here inside the solid collider. And we also want to put a reference to all of these materials. So we're going to go inside and let's go over here. We're going to drag the foundation into the default, the green one into the green one, and the red one into the red one. Because later we're going to change it programmatically. We're going to change the material. if we can place the item, if we cannot place the item, and if we actually placed the item and we wanted to get the default color. Now maybe we need to play with the tiling a bit. I don't think it's really in the center, but it's something I'm going to take care of later. So we want to make this foundation model into a prefab because we're going to instantiate it later. We're going to create it from nothing. So we go into our resources and we're going to simply drag this foundation model and place it over here. So it's going to create a prefab out of it. And now we can delete it from our scene. Simply delete. Let's go back to the player. So let's go back into the construction manager. Now, before we continue with the methods inside the construction manager, we want to talk about this constructible script that we just placed on the foundation model. So it's not a very long script. It's basically just some triggers. So let's go over it so you understand what is going on. So this script is going to be placed on all the models that are going to be able to be constructed, right? The walls, the foundation, everything you want to construct. So we're going to trigger different functionalities using this code. So we have a few different booleans that are going to see if we're actually grounded, if we are overlapping items, if we are detecting other ghosts, if it's a valid position to be built, right? We want to keep track of if this item is actually in a good place to be constructed. So we have all of these booleans, then we have all the materials, and we already set all of these materials. We have a list of ghosts. So these will be all the ghosts of this specific item, because each item, each foundation, for example, will have its own ghosts. Now, not every constructible will have ghosts, so maybe this will not be relevant for all the constructible items, but the foundation will have this one. And maybe in the future, we're going to optimize the scripts. Maybe we're going to create a separate script for the constructibles that use ghosts. Maybe we're going to create some kind of interface for constructible that have ghosts, and then we're going to implement this interface only for these constructibles. But for now, this is the way it's going to be. So even if the wall model is not going to have ghosts, it will still have this empty ghost list. Then we have a reference to the solid collider that we already set. Now in the start, we simply get a reference to our render because we want to be able to change the different materials in runtime. Then we set the default material to be our first material. We already did it, right? We dragged the material, but it will also happen in the start. So the default material will be the first material. And then we look for all the ghosts inside our object, and it will simply look for them inside the transform, and it will add them to this ghost list, right? So all the children of this foundation will be ghosts, and then it will look for them and add them to this ghost list. And you're going to understand what is the need for these ghosts. I talked about them a little bit in the previous episode, but you're actually going to see how we use them. So it's something we need to do in the start. And then we have the update, okay? And we have all of these on trigger events. So on trigger enter, on trigger exit, and set the different colors, and we have this extract ghost members. So I know that it may sound like a crazy name for a method, but you're going to understand why I gave it this name. So let's continue over here. In the update, we're simply checking if this boolean and this boolean, well, if this boolean is true and this boolean is false, then set this boolean to be true. Otherwise, set this boolean to be false. And these two booleans are going to get triggered using our onTrigger and onTriggerExit, okay? So when our constructible is going to enter and collide, let's say, with another object, then we check if this other object is the ground, and if the other object is an active constructible, then is grounded is true, okay? So we basically just want to check that our item is touching the ground. So this is how we set this is grounded, because we don't want to be able to construct items floating in the air. If you do want to do it, so simply don't check if it's grounded. We want to be able to place items on the ground, so we check if it's actually touching the ground. Now this tag is a tag that we also need to create, okay? It's not the layer that is named ground, it's a tag named ground, and we're simply going to place this tag on all of our terrains. So if we go to the landscape, terrain, we can see that all of our terrains have this ground tag. And that's something that we already did in the previous episode, if I'm not mistaken. But if not, if you did not do it, then simply add this tag to all of your terrain, or basically all the things that you walk on, okay? Because we want to check if we can place this foundation on the ground, and if it's touching the ground, then it's going to be a valid spot to be placed. And of course, we also want to check if this item itself is an active constructible. We don't want to do this check for other items that are not active. So this is the way we trigger this is grounded. Then we want to trigger this is overlapping items. So if we hit a tree, if we hit a pickable, and if we hit, well, only if we hit both of these, then it means that we're overlapping something. So again, I think we already created this tag, and I think we already created this tag. If you don't have these tags, create them, okay? And then place them. The trees we need to place on our trees. So we have the trees over here. And we need to set the tag for all of these trees. Of course, you don't have to do it one by one. You can simply select all of them and then change the tag, and it will apply to all of these trees. But it doesn't have to be trees. Any object inside your scene that you don't want to build on top, right? You don't want it to overlap. You can create a special tag for it and place it over here. For example, if you have some rocks or something like that, and you don't want to place your foundation and overlap these rocks, so you're simply going to add this condition over here. So this is what we're doing over here. And next, we also want to know if we are detecting a ghost member, okay? So as I told you, a ghost member will simply be a duplicate of our foundation that is going to be some kind of indication for a place that we can construct the foundation. And you're going to see it visually, so don't worry if you don't understand. But just know that we also want to know if our item was actually triggered by another ghost. So if we hover and we move our item around and then we hit a tree, then this overlapping items is going to get triggered. And because the overlapping is triggered, then in the update, it will not be false, it will be true. So is valid to be built will be false. And it means that we are not going to be able to build over there. So we also need to do this check if we overlap a ghost member. And if we overlap a ghost member, then we're going to set detected ghost member to true, and we're going to use it later. Now we also need to create this ghost tag, and we're going to set this ghost tag on all the ghost items. So create this ghost tag, and I already created it, okay? Just create it over here and make sure it's the same name as here. Now we need to basically do all the same checks inside the onTrigger exit, right? Because when we enter and collide, let's say, and overlap a tree, we set this to be true. But when we exit the tree, then we need to set it back to false. Otherwise, it will always be true, even if we're not overlapping anymore. So everything you do over here, okay, do it inside the onTrigger exit as well, but just change it to false. Next, we have these set invalid color, set valid color, and set default color. And the reason we created these methods is because we're going to trigger them from outside of this constructible. We're going to trigger them using the construction manager. So when we need to set the valid color, we're simply going to call this method from the construction manager, okay? So we're going to set the green material to be the material of this constructible when we call the setValidColor method. And the same with this setInValidColor and this setDefaultColor, okay? And then we have this extractGhostMembers. So it's something that you're going to understand only after we create these ghosts, but it's basically a way to take all the ghost children and set them to be items in the same root hierarchy of our foundation. Because in the beginning, the foundation will have several ghosts, right? And they will all be the children of this foundation. But when we finally place the foundation in its final position, then we don't want these ghosts to be children of the foundation anymore. We want them to be separate individuals, items inside the same root of the scene, right? Because in the beginning, we instantiate the foundation model. It will be set over here, and the ghosts will be inside of this foundation model. Okay, we're going to add the ghosts inside of this foundation model. But when we place this foundation model on the ground, it's not going to be here anymore. It's just going to be set in the root of the scene, okay? Because it's just an item that is laying around. And then we want to do the same for the children. We want to extract them. We want them to be on this root of the scene, and later we can actually interact with them and delete them. We don't want them to be children of this one foundation anymore. So this is what we're doing over here. We go over all the ghost list, right? And then we just set the transform parent to be the parent of these ghosts, okay? And we also set this boolean inside these ghost items to be true. So each ghost item will have this boolean to know if it's placed or not, and we're going to set it to true. And if the foundation was placed over here and the ghost items were the children of this foundation, then we simply set the father of this transform, which is this root, to be the new parent of these children, okay? And you're going to see how it works. I just want to explain it to you before we even do anything. So we have this method over here. Now this is all the constructible script, and maybe we're going to add a few things over here later, but for now, this is it. So before we continue with this construction manager script, we want to create these ghosts because the next methods will all deal with these ghosts, and I want you to understand what is going on. So we go back into the scene, we take our foundation model into the scene because we want to make some changes in it. And inside we're going to create an item, an empty object, and we're going to name it N1, okay? You can name it whatever you want, but we're going to have a few of them, so I just want to give them some kind of generic name, okay? So you can also name them Ghost 1, Ghost 2, Ghost 3, but you're going to see that we have different types of ghosts, okay? Because we're going to have ghosts for the foundation, and we also will have ghosts for the walls. So I'm going to name the foundation ghosts N, N1, N2, N3, and the wall ghosts we're going to name W1, W2. So this object right now, we're going to set it to be at the 1 and 1 position, and what it will do, it will simply, if we double click on this, it will simply set this item to be one step over here to the right, okay? Because if we go like that, we can see that this ghost will be over here. And now let me explain what these ghosts are actually. These ghosts will be duplicates of this foundation, and they will be all around this foundation. So it will be like a local grid system. So when we place this foundation, it's going to have all of these ghosts. It will have 8 ghosts around it. It will have 1 ghost over here, 1 on the right side, 1 on the right and bottom side, one on the bottom, one on the left and bottom, and they will just exist in our scene. And then when we want to create another foundation, the actual reason we need these ghosts is that when we want to create another foundation, we are going to overlap with this new foundation on one of these ghosts, right? And then it's going to detect over here this ghost, and it will set this detected ghost member to true. And then we're going to know that our model is now hovering over this spot. So it's going to select this ghost as the position we may want to construct our foundation, our new foundation. And this way we can actually align it perfectly with this other foundation that we already placed. Otherwise, it will be very difficult without an actual grid system to align them perfectly. But with these ghosts, it's going to be easy, okay? So this is a solution that I found, and it took me a while to write this code from scratch, as I told you. I don't think it's the most efficient way to do this building system, but it works and it's another way. And for this little tutorial, it's something that is going to be enough. As I told you, it's not just some kind of generic system that we are going to be able to use in other games. But right now we don't care about other games. We care about this game, okay? For example, I just want to give you a small announcement. Soon I'm going to start with a new series. It's not going to be a replacement for this series because we have a lot of things to add to this series, but it's going to be another series that I'm going to create slowly. It's going to be a first-person shooter series, okay? We're going to create a first-person shooter. We're going to be able to pick up guns. We're going to be able to shoot, to use tacticals and lethals like grenades, different types of guns. We're going to be able to ADS, shoot at targets, at moving targets, at AI enemies, things like that. So for example, in that game, there is no use for a building system because we're not going to build anything in that game. Of course, you can maybe merge both of these tutorials together into one big game, but it's not what we're going to do in this game. This is a survival game, right? It's going to focus only on survival. It may have weapons and bows and things like that, but it's not going to be a full first-person shooter. In this other series that I'm going to create, we're going to focus only on this FPS style, and you're going to learn things that are more related to shooting and all the different mechanisms that are involved in this genre, okay? So it's something that is going to come in the near future. Please subscribe if you want to get updated when these new episodes are coming out. And of course, it also supports me a lot when you subscribe. Now we can continue with creating these ghosts. And the shape of this ghost will actually be the same shape of the foundation model because we set the scale to be exactly 1. And because this item is a child of this model, then it will take its own shape, right? It will take the shape of the father if we set it to 1, 1, 1. Now we set the position to be 1 on the X and 1 on the Z, and it will place it over here. Now we also want to add the ghost tag to this ghost, and we want to add our ghost item script inside. We also want to add a collider and another collider, and one of them we're going to set to be trigger. Now another thing we need to do is we need to add this mesh render that we have on our foundation model and place it inside the ghost as well. So we're simply going to copy component, paste component as new. Okay, so we have this one over here, and we also want to take the cube mesh filter, copy it, and over here we want paste as new. Okay, so now we have both of them and they have the same material, although we're going to change it later. So let's close this and also close this. And now we can see that it's actually just a copy of this foundation, but this will be the ghost and this will be the foundation we placed. And we're going to have 7 more ghosts like that, okay? So we're going to take this one and we're going to duplicate it. So we have a total of 8, okay? So we don't need this one. And we're going to rename them. And we're going to give them different positions, right? Because they need to be in different positions. So for the second one, we're going to do 1 and -1 on the Z, or actually 0. This one, we're going to do 1 and -1 on the Z. This one will be 0, 0, and -1. -1, -1. -1, 0, 0. -1, 1. And this one will be 0, 0, 1. Okay, so it goes clockwise. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, these are all the ghosts. Now, of course, we don't want to get confused, and these are not actual placed foundation. These are just possible positions for a future foundation. Okay, so this is the definition of what a ghost is. So we need to change the material. So we're going to select all of them. And we're going to drag a different material. Let's go over here. And we're going to use this barely invisible material, which is the semi-transparent. Eventually, we're going to use this fully transparent, but for now, for debugging, for testing, we want to use this semi one. So we're going to select them all again, and we're going to drag this barely invisible over here. And now you can see that they all got this semi-transparent look, and these are just positions that we can select to create a new foundation, so it will get aligned perfectly with this foundation. And then when we create another one over here, then it's going to have other ghosts, and then when we create one over here, it will have other ghosts. So there will be ghosts for any square next to this foundation, right? Because usually we don't want to be able to just place a foundation anywhere. We want to place it near an existing foundation. Of course, we can create a totally new foundation over here, but if we want it to get aligned perfectly with this one, we can simply select one of these ghosts and it's going to place it over here, okay? And as I told you, this is a solution because we don't have a grid system. Now we want to go over here and apply all the changes for this prefab, okay? So now we're done with this part. We can also delete this. We can leave it over here and we go back into our construction manager. And now we can continue understand what are all of these methods, this get all ghosts and perform ghost deletion scan. But all of this will happen in the next episode, because I really don't want to make these episodes very long. So in the next episode, we're going to understand what all of this does. And I really hope that we're going to finish with the first part of our system. And of course, as I told you, you will always have to add things of your own, other parts, other tweaks, other adjustments. I'm showing you how to create this system, the base of this system, but eventually you're going to be adjusting it according to your own game, okay? So in the next episode, we're going to continue where we left off. Thank you for watching and see you next time.